Hey everyone, it's Konami, and on today's cosplay tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to use HeatnBond to create an applique. So for those of you who are wondering what the heck is HeatnBond, it's a heat fusible product that when you add heat to it, it'll actually bond two pieces of fabric together. Now, as a disclaimer, I do want to mention that this is not the end-all be-all for applique techniques. I've seen a ton out there and this is just what works for me. But what works for me might not work for you. The best course of action that I would suggest to people who are wanting to do this sort of thing with their cosplays or costumes or even just clothing in general is to research a bunch of different techniques and find out what works for you. So to dive right in, I don't want to make this a long and drawn out tutorial. You're going to need a few things to begin. First, you're going to need paper, a marker, the fabric you want to bond your applique to, the fabric that you want to make your applique out of, HeatnBond, scissors, and iron. Just kidding. And self-explanatory, you're going to need an ironing board or at least something, a surface that ironing is appropriate on. So let's get started. For this project, I already cut out a template of a Pokeball that I made myself, and it's going to look something like this. And the best way to use your template in conjunction with your fabric that you're making your applique out of is to spatially put it on there, see how big it is, and then go ahead, take your HeatnBond, and you're going to want to take the piece of fabric and kind of just eyeball how much you're using and then just cut out a piece. For this tutorial, I'm going to be a bit lenient with my cutting. Normally, I would try and get as close to the shape as possible by cutting around my template and then cutting out the HeatnBond, but I will show you by being super lenient and making it very large. Okie dokie. Now that that's done, as you can see, there's a shiny side and a papery side. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to lay the wrong side of your fabric on top of the HeatnBond, flip it over, and then lay your iron flat. The best way to avoid bubbles on your fabric and to make sure that the HeatnBond is completely adhered is to make sure that you're not moving it around like this, but more like picking it up and putting it down. And yes, the paper side is heat resistant, so don't be afraid to put that iron on top of there. And we're just gonna let that dry and cool for a second. Okay, now that it's cooled, I'm gonna take my template, I'm gonna put it on top upside down because that's just the way I want it, and I'm going to trace it onto the HeatnBond paper. And that's the good thing about having HeatnBond, because of the paper backing, drawing out templates is so easy. Okay, now that my template is all done and traced onto the HeatnBond paper, it's time to cut it out. I'm going to cut out this last piece and we'll get finished with the project. And as you can see, with the HeatnBond on the back of your fabric, it becomes like paper itself, so it becomes a lot easier to cut. Cool, we're almost done. So now comes the easy part. We're going to take the fabric that you want to apply your applique to, and you're going to want to make sure that it's really flat. You might even want to iron it to make sure. Next, you're going to take your applique, flip it over, and where you have the paper backing, you're going to want to peel it off. See how it's shiny underneath? That's the adhesive from the HeatnBond that you're actually going to use to bond this to this. Because it's kind of sticky, you can have a little bit of playroom for where you want to stick it. Just make sure that before you begin that you are 100% satisfied with the placement of where your HeatnBonded pieces of applique are. You only get one shot, because once it's bonded, it's bonded. If you need to make any alterations, like I did for this, do it now. Once you are completely satisfied with where your stuff is, go ahead and bond that sucker. Using the same technique you used before, make sure that you are applying pressure and not moving it around. Once it's done on the front, go ahead and flip it over and do the same thing on the back. If you have a steam setting on your iron, I'd suggest that you turn it off because you're going to want dry heat when making the applique. And there you have it. Your applique is now done. Alright guys, so now your applique is fused with your fabric or your costume. So if this is your final stop, congratulations, you did awesome, and now your applique is complete. But for those of you who like to wash your costumes, I highly suggest taking the time to tack down the edges of your applique to make sure that it stays put. Because while HeatnBond is really strong, it cannot withstand the heat of most washers and dryers, so it will fall off. So in order to do that, just take a sewing machine or hand stitch around the edges of your applique and it'll stay put. So guys, that concludes this tutorial. I hope it helped you. If you have any questions at all, leave them in my inbox or in the comments box below. I'd love to hear from you. And this is Konami saying thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye!